we put it into three buckets. Those areas of trade that we think fit the category of having good potential for base expansion. And you'll see next to all of them what the amount of economic activity for each is. So when you think about it in reference to that matrix, you'll be able to look at, the revenue generating capacity of certain groups of areas of trade. And those are the two documents that I think are the most important. So the first bucket that we divided it into are those that appeared to be reasonably good candidates for application of an expanded base. The second bucket, a little bit more marginal. The third bucket we would refer to as the danger zone, probably not worth consideration. So really the discussion today was going to focus on the criteria that we should be collectively using to determine what areas of trade should be considered candidates. Again, we took a first shot at it, but that's a bunch of analysts taking a first shot at it. So from your perspective, let's discuss the criteria that we should be adhering to in trying to carve out some areas of trade for potential base expansion. That's question number one. Question number two is, if we identify a certain amount of additional trade that could be assessed with an excise tax, a sales tax, there are really a couple of different ways of doing that. One would be, and I suppose we have to think about this from the education funding perspective, right? One would be, in each county, there are already tax rates that are established for the state rates, the local rates, those that apply to SCCRT and LSST and basic city county relief tax, and then a litany of options that are added within each county around the state. So in Clark County, for example, that current tax rate is 8.35%. So one approach would be to apply the entire 8.35% against the expanded base. That becomes a little bit complicated because you may have bond covenants for areas, particularly in the option tax area, that commit all of the funding that's generated from the tax to security for the bond. The other approach, and again, the 8.35% in Clark County is then again larger than what you may see in many of the rural counties by a significant margin. So you'd be applying different tax rates to the expanded base. Okay, so that's one point to consider. The next alternative would be to say, okay, for this list of items sold that would become taxable, we're applying a much lower rate to those items, say 2%. And all 100% of the proceeds of the application of the 2% against those areas of trade would go directly to education. Mm-hmm. Now, in the former example I gave you, education would only benefit from the standpoint of the LSST. From the latter, they would benefit from 100% of it. Now, clearly, too, the rates would be quite different on those areas of trade. 2 or 3% versus 8.35%. And when you're thinking ahead to explaining this to a legislative body or those that may be affected by the application of such a tax, that would seem like a rather simple choice as to which one might be more palatable. Mm-hmm. So those were the two areas of discussion for today. Criteria to apply to areas of trade that are not currently part of the sales tax base, and how to go about applying that rate. Now, all of this will be necessary in order to inform the third-party experts mm-hmm. what we actually expect them to do. I don't think we want to delegate parts of this to the third-party experts. Uh-huh. And I may be wrong in that, but I believe that the Commission would rather have some say and discretion over how that is scoped out to the third-party experts. Mm-hmm. So I've laid a lot on you there, and I apologize for not having the visual aid. Any thoughts, comments? Member Mather.
I always feel so hopeful when I hear you talk, guys. Thank you for the work and the expertise that you bring to this. Just a couple of questions. You use the example of if we expanded 10 billion in additional base, levied at 2%, then that would get us to 200 million a year, which for us is the road to average, right? Was that a example, or is that sort of realistically, could just sales tax have sufficiency to be the singular solution?
It would be my opinion that no, it probably would not. Okay. And it would probably need to be used in combination with a property tax-based solution for a couple of reasons. First, as we're sort of using an elementary example here, 2% against $1 billion might get you, somewhere close to where you need to be. But it wouldn't do that each year for a 10-year period. Once you implemented that, it would then grow at the rate that transactions grow. So to me, it's a complementary or supplementary part of an overall funding package.
And then just another couple of questions. You mentioned 50 years ago compared to now, we were goods to services 60-40 then, and we're probably flipped 40 goods, 60 services now. And we also went on to say, and the base has been becoming more narrow, but of exemptions that we've granted. So if right now the sales tax base is literally something around 40%, what chunk of that 40 do you think has additionally been exempted out? Like, is it really a 40% base, or is it material enough to make it a 25% base? I'm just trying to get
that. That's not a specific piece of analysis that we've done, but some material areas of trade have been exempted over the years. There's no question about that. I mean, I think it's an accurate statement to say that each time you take something that was taxable and make it non-taxable, you put more reliance on all of the remaining parts. An example I like to give is, here in Clark County, and this is remarkably different than it is in Washoe County, but the number one area of trade that all of the recipients in Clark County rely on is eating and drinking establishments. That's 19+% of the total sales tax generated in Clark County. Now in Washoe County, the number one producer of sales tax revenue is the sale of cars. And it's interesting that during the pandemic, because of the loss of tourism, eating and drinking establishments, again, that's nearly a fifth of the base for Clark County was absolutely hammered, right? Because, we were essentially closed for a lengthy period of time. Up in Washoe County, people were buying cars like cars were free. During COVID. It was absolutely astounding. I mean, AJ, you and Mark must have 18 vehicles parked in your yards or something, right? But that was a trend that was exacerbated or I suppose, stimulated by the fact that the car dealers were ingenious enough to offer 0% financing for 84 months while the federal government was handing out the down payments, right? It worked out rather well for certain industries, but the reliance in the North and the South is just remarkably different. And again, I've mentioned the construction example to you earlier. That's certainly that used to be close to, Nancy, as I recall, pre-Great Recession. It was about 15% of the total. And, today it's a fraction of that. It's rebounding a bit, but not to the extent that it was before. It was like our fourth or fifth largest industry here in the county. And that one is one that is certainly subject to volatility over time for a gazillion reasons, right? So I don't know if I over-answered your question.
No, that's great. That's great. And then I guess this finally the next topic on our agenda is discussing getting external experts. I mean, I know that I am so grateful that you find volunteer time to lead us as ably as you do. And I know that we're just with one hand in your pocket, relying on your expertise. But this for me is the single most important, is to get put into place for you, for the department, whatever the consulting horsepower is that you need to be able to model these things, to run these things, without having to generate your own Excel spreadsheets and make sure the department gets them. Because clearly that didn't work very well.
Well, I think, fortunately we have it this isn't the first time around this issue over the years. And I think we have a lot of it set up already as far as what you would ask the third-party consultant to do. I think some of that work has essentially been done. The running of all of the different permutations and combinations and scenarios of, how, what to do with abatements over time, what to do with depreciation over time, how sales tax reform could integrate with that. That hasn't been done. But it's very difficult and complex work, but it's also at the same time pretty straightforward from a modeling standpoint. So not to lead us into item number 12 before we're ready to, but again, I want to apologize to you all for not having that visual aid ready for us to go over, but that was the essence of it. So there's a couple areas that we would like to get some feedback, and it doesn't have to be today. One of them would be when we send that out to you, we would like you to look over the areas of trade as potential candidates for expansion of the base. And by the next meeting, hopefully get some closure on that part of it, that these are the areas that we believe should be prioritized for consideration. That will then allow us to direct the third-party experts to look at those areas. The second would be, and this is probably something that they could do both ways, but is there some agreement that this should be a separate tax applied to those new areas of trade with 100% of the benefit of that going to education on a statewide basis where the rates are then uniform county to county, or to do it some other way? Now, in saying that, if the Department of Taxation were listening into this conversation, they would be having of issues that go along with bifurcating the recipient, bifurcating the collection of taxes by area of trade. That's not something we've really ever done before, for apportionment of the revenue purposes. So that's something else, that's another bridge that we'll have to cross. But by the next meeting, I would like to get closure on both of those so we could direct the third-party experts. Does that make sense? Dr. Brune, you had your hand up, and then Mr. Malik.
Thank you, Chair Hobbs. Nancy Brune for the record. As you're talking, Chair Hobbs, I feel as though, some of the really important analysis that needs to be done really is the political analysis. And I think when you presented this a couple of months ago, I suggested that we might want to look at the tax foundation, because I think in that big bucket of industries you have, again, thinking about the political analysis, we should look at where other states have imposed taxes, because if 34 states have, unlike Nevada, have taxed a particular industry, that may suggest it's low-hanging fruit and there wouldn't be a lot of opposition. So maybe having a sense of within those categories or those trades, which one, where do we compare to other states, or which states have made progress, and then that could give us a sense of sort of the low-hanging fruit, and then maybe having some focus groups with some of those industries too, quietly about their perceptions. I would also like to suggest we might want to think about bringing in Senator Dina Neal and potentially Assemblywoman Leslie Cohen, who are both on the finance committees. I know they've started revenue conversations, so it might help us to think about what they're already discussing and where we could align. Thank you.
or did you call me? Okay.
Yeah, I thought your hand was up.
Yeah. No, I think this is such an important topic. I guess I want to keep the conversation going as long as maybe we can, just to kind of feel people out. I do agree with what Dr. Moon is saying. I guess though, to clarify, Chairman Hobbs, when you say trade, do you mean more than goods then? Do you mean services?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And I guess, I mean, just again, maybe to throw something out as we look at it, I do, our economy is changing, right? And it has moved away from goods, except for the pandemic where it's kind of sometimes returned to goods like cars, like you said. But are there new components to the economy that have escaped, for lack of a better word, taxation, right? So that might be one of my criteria. Are there, things like whatever, internet advertising or whatever, that we might think, what, we need to develop a tax that reflects today's economy. So I guess that would be one criteria or filter that I might look at, just to bring it in today's age. So just a thought. I do think, I guess I would ask, and we do have a former senator on the commission, I mean, is it more saleable when you do target a new tax and say that will go to help fund education versus it just going out to every entity in the state? It seems like that would be helpful, but maybe not.
If you'd like to respond, certainly.
Member Mathers, I would agree. I think, based upon the tax issues that have been brought forward over the past couple of sessions, and it goes all the way back, I would say it goes all the way back to the marijuana discussions that we have all dealt with ad nauseum, that, the money was supplanted that was supposed to go to education and all of that. I think politically, if the target is that new monies is going to education, and this is Pollyanna speaking now.
New money, all new money.
The general public is more supportive. So I think that's one of the things that should be in our thought processes as we move forward on this. The other thing I would say too is when Member Bloom mentioned Senator Neal, I know that she had a revenue interim committee meeting a week or so ago and brought up some of these items, and so we could check and see if we can listen in to or see the minutes of that meeting as to what she was speaking to. I know she got some pushback of the things that she was considering, but the whole thing is part of this whole conversation.
Yeah, we're going to be inclusive.
She will be having those revenue study committee meetings every month now until August. So we should probably
listen
be having our eyes and ears on that as well.
Most likely. You were going to ignore her.
Remember, I would love to have that discussion with her at some point, because there is an intersection between what they're looking at and what we're hoping to do. And I know that in the prior session, and I believe it might have been her bill, there was one targeted for digital downloads as an example. That's an area of trade that certainly, 25 years ago compared to today is remarkably different. But there are, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of digital downloads occurring every year, and our current regime does not contemplate that, and that's just one area. Now, while we've been talking here, I did send to Heidi and Jessica a copy of the spreadsheet that I hope to share with you. So, if they have it and can pop it up, I can give you a real quick walkthrough. In the meantime, Paul.
Thanks.
Thanks, Guy. I appreciate that. I think I want to just, for my own clarification, kind of test what I heard. So what we're trying to do is somewhat limit the scope of a consultant to quantify those potential tax policy reforms that would have a greater likelihood of passing and be of a sufficient amount to move the needle, but also, I guess, ensure that those funds would be committed to the state education fund.
Yes, and not to speak on Member Woodhouse's behalf, but I think both of those things we have to be cognizant of. Now, I think we have to be a bit cautious because even if you're talking about the most minor expansion of the base, there will be a constituency out there that will hate it. There's absolutely no question about that. So, this is not a trivial matter on either side. And frankly, when you talk about property tax, I don't know that there's anything that gets people more excited, or, at least that has traditionally been the case, than talking about property tax. All of these are going to be a very difficult lift. But when you contrast it with the cost of taking no action and the impact that that has on education, in my mind, that's one of the things that I think we need to hit hardest with. In front of you is that matrix I referred to a bit earlier, and you'll see across the
Billions?
line 6, increments of $5 billion in new commerce that could be taxed and tax rates running down in column B. And I referred earlier to a 2% tax, which would be on line 14, generating $200 million. Now, that's not $200 million a year. You could also go with a 1% tax on $20 billion of new trade and achieve the same thing, and over time increase that rate from 1 to 1.5 to 2 to 2.5%. You do have the ability to do that and phase the rate in over time. Phasing things in is something that the state has shown a great affinity for over time once it's made a decision to do them. Phasing is a more popular way of doing it than doing it all at once. The other tab that I would ask Heidi to click on would be the let's do estimated tax on services first. And in 2021, for example, the total amount of untaxed areas of trade that we were able to identify, and these are based on 2018 numbers, so we need to refresh these a bit. We worked on this about a year ago, a little over a year ago. $104 billion at a 0.25% tax rate raises $260 million. Forecast 4 to 23 would raise $283 million. So that's again to demonstrate the revenue producing power of a relatively small tax rate, albeit this is against the entirety of areas of trade that are currently not taxed. The next tab I want you to take a look at would be the tiered services. And we're probably not going to be able to look at the thing in the whole because it goes out quite a bit further to the right. But the Tier 1 services, you can get an idea looking at the subjects that you see in column A: services to buildings, office administrative services, computer services, management consulting services, those kinds of things. And then out to the right, what you'll see is how much of those are attributable to what industries. Leisure and hospitality, manufacturing, financial activities, to see exactly where those areas of trade, where they receive most of their revenue production. And then over on the far right, you would see the total amount of taxable services each one may represent. And again, this is kind of a proxy for real data. And as you page down, you'll see that Tier 1 should have it at the very bottom of this there should be a total for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 that you could then relate back to, and those should be in bold. Yeah, there you go. And if you go over to the left on line 87, that should be tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So if you go all the way back over to the left, if you were to apply a tax to everything in tier 1, you would see the total on the far right-hand side. Could take that back to that matrix that we showed you a bit earlier, and you would be able to see the revenue production in each one of those areas. So that hopefully would assist you all in looking this list over and making some determination about
Y'all need that tier
what our
2.
more
Tier
fruitful
2 is
areas
what
for
you need
exploration
really
might be. Does that help a little bit?
No, it doesn't.
So those are the 3 tabs I would concentrate on.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Johnson, and then Poonam.
Yeah, thanks again, Guy. So I want to talk about 2 issues, and maybe to help facilitate things. We have a small subcommittee that was kind of tasked to taking a look at that stuff, and maybe we could have that group get together between meetings to kind of fine tune some things and frame a discussion for the broader group. And I'd recommend that perhaps Dr. Brune and Joyce be involved with that process, something to consider. And then secondly, I'm not sure whether it's more appropriate in this discussion or a future discussion, but I wanted to talk about the comment that you made about the cost of not doing this. Somehow that has to be quantified, and there has to be some return on investment that's displayed, because we're going to ask people to put a lot of money into education, but it's not without some return. So whatever we're going to do is going to have some sort of impact to socioeconomics. It's going to have some sort of impact with respect to the amount of money that's available for governments to spend and put back into their communities. It's going to have impacts with respect to potential industry expansion in Nevada and labor markets and those types of things. So I'm not sure where that happens, but I think that has to take place in concert with any increases in taxes that might be paid, because that will help other people know that it's not just an expense, it's going to affect the other side of the equation as well. Thanks.
Taken. I appreciate that, and I think it might be good to have a group, and I can't remember who was the part of that work group, but having Dr. Brune and Member Woodhouse involved in it certainly makes sense. There's a local government potential impact on this as well, and I don't know if that is something that Member McIntosh would be interested in participating in, but I think it would be great to have a group take a first look at it, and when we come back together in March, be able to maybe move through that discussion in a more efficient manner than I've been able to today. Member McIntosh.
Thank you, Chair Hobbs. I would very much like to be part of that. You are putting a group together, and I appreciate the discussion here. This is a lot to absorb, and I would like to take a chance to take a look at this information regarding all of the various services. I concur with what all of my members have said today. Regarding the criteria we would use, certainly we ought to be focused on modernizing the tax structure in a way that reflects the current economy and directing those dollars specifically to education. And so, but I think we also have to balance that with what's politically palatable, not just to the legislature, but also to the taxpayers. So I guess to wrap up, I would appreciate being on the subcommittee, and I concur with our comments. I think I do need some time, though, to go through this to sort of to better reflect on what's included here and give you some better answers as to what might be best to take a look at.
The numbers are all distorted.
If that matrix is still available to be put up, I'll just make one last comment and then mercifully try to move on.
Yeah, you're short, and you've always been short, and that's not a joke.
The point I was going to make was that if you recalled looking at the tier 1 item, the total was about $22 billion, and you can put your finger between the 20 and the 25 billion on that matrix and move downward to see what the relative revenue production might be at different rates. And that's if tier 1 was to be acceptable as we move forward. So that's how I would go back and forth between those two tabs. Okay. So I don't think we have any action to take on this. Thank you for your indulgence, and I apologize for not having that visual aid up earlier. We'll move to item number 11. I think we've already actually started talking about item number 11 during item 10. The Commission will continue to discuss communication strategies regarding recommendations for optimal funding to support the pupil-centered funding plan. Just to kick this off, and there are certainly people that are better versed in this than me, in order to begin to message, we need to know what the message really is.
Yes,
and
we
what
all
the
do.
ask is. And we're still
Equity.
in the process of developing that.
Equity.
Specifically.
That's the message.
And we probably will probably take the consultants 2 to 3 months to develop all of the scenarios, bring it back to the Commission, and have the Commission focus in on a series, what I would presume to be a series of recommendations that would involve funding sources. In the meantime, I think it's well worth our while, and I would certainly ask members Mather and Woodhouse to comment on this, to start engaging with some of the folks in our respective communities about the fact that we expect to be coming forward. We're not talking about scary sales tax rate increases. We're talking more about sales tax base reform, which is long overdue, with or without the education argument. And I think the other thing that's going to be exceedingly important for us to do is to be able to continue to message to the youth. If we are not successful at messaging the need, then I'm concerned about how well received the revenue proposals are going to be. Dr. Jensen and I have had a chance to talk about this. We had comments from one of the superintendents during public comment today, and would certainly suggest that each of our next agendas include much more discussion about justification for the need for the revenue. Again, we know
Talk
it's
about
there. We talk about it at each one of our meetings.
Yeah, but you don't talk about where you really need that revenue.
Sufficient,
Yes.
for everyone to discharge their missions. And now I think we need to start being far more detailed about that. Hand in glove with making these funding recommendations. Poonam, again, I would ask you and Joyce, because both of you are much more schooled in the political elements of this than I am.
Thank you. I think you just hit it on the head. I think there's the series of recommendations is going to be the centerpiece of the conversation, but the context in which that occurs is going to be really important. 2 directions. One, but what will it buy us? And so I was really delighted actually to hear NAS through Dr. Stevens volunteer to work with us to say, here's what optimal would deliver in the state. So I think that's important. The other part of it that's been actually nebulous, as I mentioned during our last meeting, that EdWeek Quality Counts in their most recent report had noted that while still 50th and 49th in the nation, when it came to K-12 student achievement over the last decade, we were 18th in the nation. And so I volunteered, and Joyce and I went and tried to dig further into that data. I think the long and short of it is that every report that comes out, the Fordham universities that just came out more recently, continually places Nevada 49th or 50th. And for what little the community as a whole may know about education, what everyone knows is that we are at the bottom, right? And so it becomes difficult to make a saleable argument to say, hey, invest more in what you believe generates nothing. And so I believe that the data over the last decade is there, but it will take some data analysis to pull out the strands of student achievement based on the categorical investments, which was the precursor for the revitalization of or the reformulation of the funding formula.
Well,
So I think
what's
the
the
story's
precursor
there.
for
We've gotta
SB
collect
543? Just go
so
ahead and
that when
say
we
it.
go on the road,
She
it
didn't
is
say
with a complete story. It is, here's what small, minor categorical investments in teaching and leading pipeline,
Yeah.
and Zoom and
Let's talk
Victory and
about what
technology.
happened with
Here's what
Tyrone
small
Thompson and his
investments
read by
yielded.
grade 3 bill.
Look at the trend in student achievements. Here's what will be possible
Mhm.
prospectively by making the investment, and then here's the pathways that you can look at to get us there.
Mhm.
So for me, it's all three. And if we can get, for you, the right kind of subject matter support
Mhm.
to really take these pathways, a series of recommendations, that's one key piece. On a parallel track, Joyce and I will keep working to try to get some way to be credible and fact-based in demonstrating what ROI has already been seen, just not visible by the small investments that we've made. And so I think we got to package the whole thing, because if we're going to go to major influentials, we got one opportunity to sort of make the first impression. And so I think it works better from, I mean, I'd love to hear what you all think, but my sense would be, let's give you the time to get the models a bit more specific, bouncing off the policy questions that you are by this group, so that we can have something that reflects our consensus thinking in terms of here's a series of recommendations on a parallel track. If that takes 2 to 3 months with consultants helping you, then that gives Joyce and I sort of and Paul, because Paul's in on this too, it gives us a 2 to 3 month window to really get busy to try to quantify that here's what the past small investments yielded, here's what will be true with greater investment, and then once that's all ready, hopefully the end of April into May, then we will have an aggressive roadshow. Joyce, and that's sort of what we've been talking about. So anything else, Paul? Anything to...
Yes, that is exactly what we've been talking about. Poonam, you laid it out exactly. Thank you.
I see member Fueling.
Just a quick question for Senator Woodhouse. I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but I think I'm maybe getting past this discussion a bit, but I believe during the last session there was a presentation, and I forget. I think I have a copy of it somewhere. A gentleman was. I think that the kind of the basis of it was how many more teachers do we need in Nevada, and I thought it was like some huge number, like 3,000, and it would cost $800 million. I don't recall the details of it. And Senator Woodhouse, I don't know if I know you go through a lot during a session, so I don't know if you recall that one exactly, but something like that where it's easy to say. I think we want to put money towards a specific use, and we think this will be the outcome. And in that case, it's kind of more of a general idea of trying to keep class sizes at reasonable, so that teachers can do what they do. And do you think that it's harder maybe to pin something down of exactly what we'll see because of that? I think in terms of what Poon maybe is looking for. So do you know? I mean, if you remember that presentation, do you think that has any impact when there's? I know it's kind of overwhelming when you're seeing those kind of numbers and that sort of thing. So I'm sorry, it's kind of maybe kind of vague, but.
I remember vaguely hearing about it, but I can also check in with LCB Research, and I'm sure that I know that they have a copy of that presentation. So I'll find it and share it with the commission, and especially with Paul and Poonam, so that we can use that as well. But yes, those kinds of things make a difference. So, you know, and at least it needs to be part of the basic tenets that you're looking at as we build the presentation that will come about in a number of months. So thank you for reminding me of that, and I will see what I can do about finding it.
And then Member Johnson.
You're on mute, Jason.
The hand down button. Thanks, Paul. I think that in talking about class sizes, I think that certainly drives down the, driving down class sizes is certainly one of the areas we can look at. However, there's a national shortage of teachers. And so it's an easy answer to say, go hire more teachers. We have 600 to 800 that we can hire here every year, or that need to. And what I want to make sure we build into this piece is a mechanism, other than just going to hire, but there's looking at how we set up programs with funding to fund those sort of programs, educational programs at CSN and other universities to start driving a larger supply, because the demand nationwide is vastly underserved. And so I completely agree with the comment. I just want to make sure we build the argument, that we build in pieces to help build that pipeline, because it's not just about paying teachers more, because I don't think we can ever pay teachers enough, right, to just make them stop doing other jobs. I mean, it's just not economically possible. And so we got to really focus on class size, working conditions, right, to ensure that they have the time to do things that they need to do, as well as trying to figure out how we get more teachers. So I just want to make sure that's part of the conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Guy. And thanks, Jason, for doing that on my behalf, on being on mute to make me feel better about doing that earlier. Appreciate you doing that. A couple of things that I wanted us to say out loud as we talk about where we currently are with respect to funding, and we mentioned some of the successes that we have had, because the stat that I've heard is that we are 18% in growth. Some people have asked, if we're doing so great, why would we change? So I think we have to be prepared to answer that question as we go through messaging, because what we have is not only new and different, that it's better, and we have to be able to explain what better means. And I think if we have what Dr. Jensen had mentioned and the superintendents, where they're going to say, hey, this is what we can do with our funds. We're not going to get rid of those things that we have done with the targeted funds. Those are going to be in place, but they're just going to be funded in a different manner. And if we had more of our ability to do that, we could have better gains, and not just talk about our growth, but also talk about our placement with respect to where we are in that as well.
Thank you very much. Again, not to restate the obvious, but we'll get into this a little bit more in the next agenda item. But we're asking for a substantial amount of funding for the benefit of education. And one of the first questions that is going to be asked, you all have been through this before, I don't need to tell you what questions are going to be asked, but exactly what would you do with, the first 50 million? What would you do with the next 20 million? That kind of thing is certainly going to be asked. The accountability questions and return on investment type of questions always come up as well. And I think we need a very structured approach to that. And I'm not quite sure what that approach is, because you all are the ones that are the experts in, where your greatest needs are and how you would apply the money to address your highest priority. But it's going to need to be a particular area of focus for us if we're going to get, particularly if we're going to be tackling two of the most difficult revenue sources that we could possibly be tackling. So just say that again.
Just say that again.
We'll go ahead and move the agenda. to agenda item number 12. And this is for a discussion of I'll read what they wrote for me. For our next item, the Commission will identify areas of our statutory responsibilities for which we may require additional support from external subject matter experts and may identify potential sources for such support. With regard to the support for doing the work, our gratitude to the Department of Education for finding some funding for us to be able to move on these areas. That was, that without that having been done, talking about the scope would be, simply an exercise and not one that would be terribly meaningful. The intent of this item was to come to some kind of consensus on what it is we would be asking the subject matter experts to do. And I did prepare and send something up to Department of Education in a very crude Word document type of form, not fancy PowerPoint slides, as I really didn't have time to do that. And I don't know if that's something that they may be able to share screen to perhaps go over. Heidi, is that doable?
Heidi Hartz for the record. Yes, just give us one moment.
And first and foremost, before this pops up, and Member Johnson and I had a chance to talk about this in the last couple of days, I would say priority number one would be to do a recalculation of the model that we've already generated, which indicates what our funding needs are. We have our prior model that we used to identify the funding targets, as you all recall, focused on both national average and APA recommended levels of funding. That was done for a report that we issued almost a year ago. So we need to update those for more current information. Inflate the APA recommendations by an additional year, resource the national average values, verify what the current amount of spending per pupil is, and recompute all of the funding targets. I would place that right near the top. We'll certainly need that for the report that we're going to file in the coming months. But that, again, I would place as the top priority. What I have for you here, and again, I realize that it's been a very long day with a lot of information. Under the area of property tax reform, and I don't know if this is something that you saw previously or are seeing it for the first time now. Have you had a chance to review this previously? Then we won't go reading through it, but what I've tried to do is identify under the area of property tax reform, the things that we would be asking the subject matter expert to do. So I'll give you a moment to walk through that, comment on it. If there's something I left out, add it to the list. When you're ready to move on, just tell me that you're ready to move on, and I will do so. Have you had an opportunity to read through that, what's on the screen now? Then go ahead and page a little bit further. That's the property tax side. And let's look at the sales tax side. have you all had a chance to read through the sales tax site? And again, if you have any additional comments, suggestions, things to add to the list, Member Mather.
Thank you, Chair. So it must have been close to 20 years ago when I was on the executive committee of the local chamber of commerce and service sales tax on services was a topic of conversation. I remember then discussion around to try to make it a palatable transition to expand sales to services. Is there a way to reduce on tangible goods while imposing on services? Right, so that, yes, I'm paying what I have never paid on before, but on what I have been paying for, I get a slight reduction. So I don't know if that's a bullet in here or if that's contemplated within a bullet that's already there.
I can certainly add that as a bullet. The reason why it wasn't included is those past discussions were probably more oriented toward balancing the base to reduce the volatility and not necessarily to produce additional revenue.
Yes.
So we've added that particular feature here that if we were to decrease the tangible goods side by the amount we were increasing the other side, we might end up at something that's revenue neutral, which would be good tax reform. But as far as producing additional revenue for education might be a bit more muted. But, certainly we're going to be looking for every opportunity, to try to make what we're proposing as palatable as it can possibly be. And I say that with all of the understandable reservations that I should be saying that with, that the notion of making property tax reform and sales tax reform palatable in and of itself is its own challenge, right? But anything that would improve the palatability is certainly something we should look at. And on the property tax side, you might recall we were looking at something similar as a way of dealing with the abatement by reducing the property tax rates to absorb the abatement and then creating headroom for future ballot initiatives as one option is certainly centered along the same line of thinking as what you're talking about. But what you have before you is the scope that we would then, if you concur with it, we would then provide to NDE when they go out. It'll be NDE's procurement process, by the way. It's their money. But this is the scope that they would be using to go out to find third-party experts capable of doing this work. So I guess the question to you all is, do you concur with this scope? With the addition that Clemen suggested.
If you need that in the form of a motion, Guy, I would be prepared to make a motion to move forward with the information that you recommended and as Poonam had added.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second, making sure this is actually an action item. It doesn't say possible action, but if you all tell me that you concur, that probably suffices. Great. Does everyone concur? Okay. Thank you.
Chairman,
You have your hand up, Member
I
Mather.
do. Just a quick question. So this is item 12 is regarding external subject matter experts. So I'm grateful to NDE for finding some blank checks or 8 blank checks. My question is, how many blank checks did they find? This for me is the single most important way to spend it. But if there are other checks, I am cognizant that we've got an NCEI that still needs some scrubbing, and now we've had some discussion about online. And so we can multitask if there's checks enough to go around. So I'm just wondering, how many checks did they find?
Poonam, you raised an incredibly important point. It's obviously a finite amount of money in the realm of $250,000, which is what was requested when we originally sent the letter to the governor and legislature. What it's going to take to do the recalculation of the funding targets and the property tax and sales tax reform, I can only guess. Given that I do this kind of work, I kind of have an idea, but I don't know until and I don't want to say a dollar amount because it's something that the Department of Education is going to have to go out for RFP or RFQ to determine. But it will be, it'll be a material part of the $250,000, I would say. So, you mentioned the fact that there are two other items as well. Some additional discovery around the NCEI issue as well as the online issue, if that can't be handled internally. Whether all of that fits within that dollar amount, I do not know, because we have not done that yet. So one of the things that we probably need to do is prioritize how that money is expended. And, from my perspective, doing the recalculation is probably not more than a week's worth of work, something like that. Doing these other two items is a significant amount of work, 2 to 3 months, given the fact that while we may have identified some initial scenarios for them to develop, I am guessing that when they come back to this commission, we will ask for additional scenarios. So, it's going to be a fairly fluid process. So from a priority standpoint, I would start the discussion off by recommending that the recalculation, the property tax piece, and the sales tax piece appear near the top of our priority list. And again, there may be some other thoughts, but everything that we talk about has to do with funding as being the cure for every other ill that comes up, right? We do have the NCEI issue and some additional work on the online. Thoughts, suggestions?
And I am comfortable, Chair Hobbs, focusing for that optimal funding. That is so critically important that nothing else is going to matter if we can't get that. Really start making some headway in that. So, given that we don't know, we were lucky that this funding turned up. Seems like that ought to be by far the priority. And if we are absolutely confident that there's enough to also do NCEI, for example, then great. But if there's even a little bit of unsure whether there's enough, I would say this feels like the overriding priority for me. And I think the discussion of what is an online student and what should a contemporary formula ticket, that's for me a phase 2. We've decided today to just keep the funding at status quo on that, and then, so that to me doesn't rise as consideration right now so much.
Your last point, Poonam, until I talk with NDE staff, I don't know how much of that can just be done internally, the online piece. I don't know, but we'll find out about that. That would be great if that's available information and it didn't require a subject matter expert. So again, this is not an action item, so it's as much for concurrence as anything else to get moving forward with this. And I'd certainly encourage NDE. I know they have a procurement process to go through that's the state. I'm much more familiar with local procurement processes than I am the states, but we would like to get moving as quickly as humanly possible. Any other comments on this? And by the way, I realize that in going over things like the property tax and sales tax and even the scope, I totally realize how exciting all of that is. When I go home and my wife asks me, "What did you do today?" There is no way in God's earth I ever talk to her about what I did today. I would never get away with that. So I get it. But I think this is the right path for us to be taking. If there's no other comments, we'll move to agenda item 14, which is our second public comment period on any matter within the Commission's jurisdiction, control, or advisory power. As a reminder, members of the public may provide... Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I believe you skipped agenda item 13. Future agenda items?
I totally skipped agenda item 13. You're the only one that caught it, Heidi. Future agenda items. I'm sorry. We talked today about at least a couple of agenda items. Obviously, the online piece will be coming back to us. Dr. Jensen.
So the two pieces, just to remind us that when we talked about the charter piece, agenda item number 5, we were going to add so that it includes school districts as well, which should be a real quick one for us at the next meeting. Then to follow up on President Stevens' presentation, I would recommend or ask that we have NAS come and provide a presentation in March regarding those issues that she talked about. We've got our 2 urbans, 2 rurals, and the Charter Authority are already primed to engage the Commission in that conversation in March, if it's the Commission's will.
Thank you for those additions. Any additional items? We will be bringing back the sales tax discussion. I do see your hand, Mark. We will be bringing back the sales tax discussion and hopefully, be able to make some headway on the areas of trade and an approach to that, as we talked about earlier. So that will be on Mr. Mathers.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, maybe Dr. Jensen kind of encapsulated this already, but I would like to talk about funding of transportation capital costs going forward.
Okay. Anyone else? Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman Hobson. And if you would also, you might as well include nutrition with respect to that as well. So they're both together, because there are capital concerns on the nutrition program side of things. And I don't want one to just be applied to the other one if there are differences. Then the other thing that perhaps we might need to take a look at, and Guy, you and I had kind of talked about this, we're dealing with adequacy funding targets that were originally established in by APA in 2006. And we've been using their professional judgment benchmark as our measure of adequacy. And I'm not quite certain that is the best measure of adequacy. And perhaps we need to have that updated so we can kind of triangulate an adequacy number with respect to a national average. They had an evidence-based approach, which I thought was better, but it produced a higher result. And we ended up using the professional judgment approach number because it was a little bit less than that. So in the future, I think we may want to have a better definition. That might also help us identify what optimal is.
That's right. That might help you.
Okay. Dr. Jensen, your fake hand is still up over here. Okay.
My apologies.
No worries. Just wanted to make sure we captured everyone. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move to agenda item 14. This is the second public comment period. Members of the public may provide comment by dialing in using the link on the meeting agenda or by calling 312-584-2401 and entering passcode 560554#. When members of the public dial in using these methods, they'll be placed in a waiting room until public comment is open. Alternatively, they can submit in writing via email to nvboarded@doe.nv.gov to be read into the record. So at this point, I'll turn it back to Dylan to see if we have any public comment for the second public comment period.
We do not have any written in public comment, and I wanted to give it just another second or two to let anyone who may call in, but it does not appear I have anyone in my waiting room.
Okay, very good. Just one closing comment. Jessica Todman, who's been working with us from day one, is getting married in about a week or so. And she hasn't told us yet where she's registered, but I know she's looking for some towels and linen, so you guys might want to throw a few dollars together.
Thank you, Chair Hobbs.
Congratulations to you, Jessica. And with that, that brings us, that concludes today's agenda. It is